So this old forum is probably dead from back when I built this 12-foot Telemaster, but I'm finally getting around to looking at constructing the floats. So I've got 70-inch laser cut foam cores from Seaplane Supply. They come in two pieces, so I have to join that with epoxy. And you can see it has a section for a spine and a piece for plywood in the middle. And it came with 3 pieces of 1/4-inch plywood for the spine and 1 piece of 1/4-inch plywood that fits in this groove here. And then they gave me the laser cut parts to make up the difference. So I presume they intended you to cut that into 4 pieces and have a section glued in wherever your landing gear or spreaders or whatnot was going to mount. I think, of course, the plywood is also 48 inches to ship, I presume, and a person can splice these together. What I'm thinking I'll do is cut a 45 and then do a half lap dado 1/8 off of both ends at 45 degrees, so I have like 1 inch of overlap and a 45-degree bevel, and then I'll put the long piece of plywood from the back so that the joint in the plywood is not at the same spot as the joint in the foam. And I think I'll do the same thing with these top strips. I think I'm going to run full-length plywood down both the top of both floats just to give it that extra strength. It's really not any extra weight. And I'll do a bevel cut half lap splice on those as well. So for spreaders, I've still got a piece of this airfoiled. It's actually not just plain aluminum. These are aircraft grade jerry struts that I use to make the struts for the airplane. And I've got a couple pieces of 1/8 inch by 2 inch aluminum. I think I'll actually end up using these. The other thing that concerned me is I've got so the plan is once I get these glued together and the spines in, I'll probably sheet the bottom with got a bunch of 1/32 plywood. Got some 1/4-inch plywood that I'll rip to make the extra pieces for the spine that I need. And I have some 1/8 inch plywood. I might actually sheet across the top with 1/8 inch plywood and the 32nd across the bottom. As far as finishing it, I'm not sure if I'm going to go with epoxy and fiberglass glass them, or if I've got it sheeted with plywood on top and bottom, I might hit some lightweight spackle, sand the sides, and just cover them in ultra coat. I've used these cores before and they handle regular heat just fine. You can't really seem to melt them with a covering iron, and that ends up being a pretty slick and pretty easy way to finish them. So the only other concern I've got, if I have a spreader across here and bolted into that center spot, and that's just held to the float by adhesives, I think that might be a little weak. So I'm actually thinking I might put some wax paper down in the groove, put the spine in there, glue that to it, so that I can pull so I can have these pieces pulled out, glued together. And I was contemplating, let me see if I've got a little bit of aluminum angle iron. I'll use thicker stuff. That's just a piece I use to glue ribs in straight. I've got a piece of 1/8 inch instead of, I think that's 16. But anyway, I was thinking maybe a 4-inch long piece of aluminum, and then I could make a little, scab a little piece of plywood right in there just to make it flat. And then my spreader could be drilled and tapped right through the plywood, right through the aluminum, and that way you'd have a mechanical joint to that center spine. And then I'd end up removing foam for that angle iron. I could just use a Dremel tool with the router attachment or whatever, and then use a soldering iron to melt a hole for the angle aluminum that would fit down in there. And then I'd got some 1/4 by 20 stainless cap screws to mount the spreaders, and then I've got some smaller screws and nuts that I figured I would use to attach the angle aluminum to the spines. And I've got a pair of digital waterproof programmable servos. Programmable might be nice. I thought I would make it symmetrical, have the servo mounted inside with the arm in on both sides, and I can program one for reverse rotation without having to kind of out of channels, without having to use a reversing Y or anything like that. For control, I was thinking these goldenrod heavy duty, they're like 440 size plastic rod, and I'm not sure what to do with a water rudder. Anything that's available commercially is way too small, so I'll probably end up building my own. So that's it for now. I guess I'll rip some plywood, cut angle splices with like a half lap, and have those cut. That way I can mix up one batch of epoxy and epoxy the foam pieces together while I splice the plywood, and after that I'll start working on probably sheeting the bottom of it would be the next logical step.